Okay, go ahead. I would like to call this meeting to order. We would like to acknowledge that the land that we are gathered upon is the traditional territory for the Anishinaabe, the Ottawa and Mississaugas people. Confirmates the agenda that the Council Township of North Huron hereby accepts the agenda for the July 25th, 2022 special council meeting as presented. Do I have a mover? Rick moves. Seconder, please. Paul seconds. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Disclosure of pecuniary interest. Tonight there should be none. Delegations, 5.1. You have before you RC-2022-09 staffing and service levels for the recreation facilities. Are there any questions for Vicki on this? We've sent this around a few times and we've had a lot of conversation on it. Paul, could you please go ahead?
Yes, through you, Reba. This is for Vicki. Like I see that you're looking to bring 2 part-time up to 2 full-time. And the final cost for doing that, for covering this year, is going to be approximately the 20 grand. But you still, could you just explain to me, it still says a deficit. And I'm just curious how we can even think of opening the arenas with 3. And then you said there's other options here. I just want you to elaborate a little bit on that, if you don't mind.
Through your worship. So in terms of our staffing situation right now, as indicated in the report, we have 3 vacancies that we're unable to fill in order to open up the facilities for the high season going forward. When we talk about the deficit and things, it's more so on a year-long basis. Like when you take the hours of operations, the staff operating hours or the staff working hours that are required to operate the facilities and things, and you divide that up by their 40 hours a week and things like that, that's where we're running into a deficit. But what it is we feel it's more manageable when we can cover off on 8 hours, short 8 hours a week, rather than when we're short 100 hours a week and that kind of thing. And then in terms of the other options that are listed there, basically these are the same options that was presented to council in fall of 2021. I think what year it was, but in 2021 when we experienced the shortage as well. So if council wishes us to report back on any of those other options, like provide more detailed information or something, we would need that direction. But the options to consider was operating 1 arena for the season or reducing the hours of operations at 1 or both facilities. But if we go forward with our normal level of service, then we need to have the staff to move forward.
Go ahead, Paul, for a second.
Yes, just follow up on that through you, Reba. I just wondered if we could have a report on that, just to see what it would look like and for what savings could be or not have. I think it'd really be beneficial before we make decisions, some decisions on that. Thank you.
So if I just before I go to Kevin, just decisions on what? I just wasn't sure what you were.
Oh, I'm sorry, with the options 1 and 2.
1 and 2?
Like to have a report, so there's a lot of stuff in there and I'd like to see how it's going to play out through the different options that was offered here.
Okay. And we're good with that, Vicki?
Through your worship, if that's council's decision that they would like to have that report, their direction, I can certainly provide more information.
Okay. I'm going to go to Kevin first, then to Trevor.
Thank you. Through you, Reeve. In the last part of 2020 and 2021, and up to this 2022, how many staff are we missing from our allotment that we've had in those other years? How many people are we missing that we didn't have last year and the year before?
We have 3 vacant positions.
Going right this day, we have 3 vacant.
3 vacant positions. positions right now.
3 operators?
There's 1 full-time vacancy, and then there's 2 part-time vacancies. The part-time vacancies, those are 30 hours a week.
So we're down 1 operator, 1 full-time operator, and 2 part-time. Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Trevor.
Can you elaborate, Vicky, as to when you indicated that the options to consider were the same, the other options to consider were presented to council in 2021? Was a report provided at that time as well as to what those savings were, and it was just a reporting, just saying that these were the options? It didn't actually go into depth about what the savings would be or how you would look at that?
For you, your worship, that is correct. We had a similar report in, for last, oops. Sorry, I thought I was loud enough. My apologies. So in the fall of, I believe it was September of 2021, we brought forward a report regarding the staffing situation then. We were in a deficit position as well, and that report is basically was presented in the same manner in which this is what we need for staffing if council does not wish to proceed with the staffing. Here are 2 other options for you to consider.
Sorry, and at that point, we decided to ask for you to continue to the hire, so we didn't have to go through those other options. Is that correct?
That's correct. Through you, your worship,
So-
sorry.
So through you, your Eve, my question really becomes is, I don't disagree with Councillor Heffer in the sense of you can't make a decision on those other options without a report. I completely concur with that, with Councillor Heffer's assessment there. The question that I have is, based on the recommendation from the Director of Rec, is the municipality of North Huron has done, like every other small municipality has done, is they've piecemealed full-time work with part-time staff, because then they don't have to, the intention is then they're not required to pay benefits. That's really the whole idea here. And again, I think what everybody is finding out is in small rural municipalities, you are not going to get away with that anymore in this labor market. So my question is, so really it's not more a question, it's more of a comment. So the question has been, how many vacancies do we have? We currently have the equivalent to 2 full-time staff and a little bit from hours perspective. My question to Vicky more as when it relates to these hirings is, if we were successful at getting 2 full-time people, those 2 full-time people would be segregated amongst the they're not going to be both working days.
Through you, your worship, that is correct.
So ultimately, everybody wants days because that's the great life. That's what everybody wants. That's what we have. However, you can't run a facility for the timeline that we have at 6 in the morning till 11 o'clock at night with having all your operators during days. So I think we have to recognize that full-time employment is preferable in this market for somebody willing to get it. I think we also have to recognize that if we as a municipality can't find acceptable people who have all the credentials, we need to step up our game and provide them that says, if you're willing to be a supporter of North Huron, we're willing to support you in your training and development and get you to the point where we want to make sure you're a 20-year employee. Whether that's the case or not, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you're ever going to see a 20-year employee anymore in any market, let alone the municipality market. But we have to get better at being in the market, because right now, I think if we're going to continue to look for part-time work, we are not going to be in the market. And we're finding that out because this has come back again after March or April when we tried to hire originally, I believe. So, I concur with, I concur with the recommendation of the director of rec in the sense that we need to hire full-time staff. I think in the caveat to that, I think the report that Councillor Heffer is talking about is a good report to have if we are not successful in the recruitment process. Because we are going to need those answers. And that's a difficult decision that's going to have to be made. And, it's going to have to be talked about one way or another. Because as we're all aware here on council, hiring practices are hard enough as it is for senior level positions, let alone the people that are on the front line groundwork, and we're trying to hire part-time staff. So, if there is, I will leave it at that, and I'll let other councillors have their chance to have their opinion or questions, but that's my piece, Reeve Bailey.
Just to follow up from what I've heard so far, and then I'll go over to Anita. So are you hiring on 2 full-time and 1 part-time? Second question would be, are these 2 full-times permanent days? We kind of ran into this with, Anita brought Ms. Vince Hitterson brought it up at the cemetery problem where we need to rotate the staff so that somebody's not stuck on one shift all the time and work the staff around what we needed for that particular problem. Can you just answer those 2 questions for me, please, for council?
Yes, Your Worship. So the recommendation is to hire a new full-time operator and to hire or to increase the hours of 2 part-time operators to make them full-time as well. Again, the part-time operators are working 30 hours a week year-round. Our operators work shifts, so they are not on a straight days or straight evenings, straight weekdays or weekends. It's a rotational schedule, and everyone takes turns on that schedule, working days, evenings, weekends, and so forth. In terms of, I'd just like to comment on the number of operators right now. I had a meeting with one of the managers this afternoon regarding this report, and he has indicated he is the manager that's planning on retiring this year, and he has indicated that if we are struggling with getting the full-time operators, that he will come back and work part-time for the municipality to help fill a position after he retires. So that's something that we can certainly consider, depending on our situation and things like that. But that's it's very helpful because you have a wealth of knowledge and expertise there. I would like the flexibility, though, that if we can't fill the full-time position, that the part-time would be, if we had an applicant like him, that we could do that. But that certainly does make things look a bit better for council and for our budget.
Thank you. Just for further clarification, then I'm going to go to Anita, had her hand up, and then Kevin. Just for further clarification, so when we have operators and we have 3 facilities, I believe Belgrade runs on their own, so let's say we have 2 facilities, but I don't want them thinking we're leaving them out. Do we rotate the staff between the facilities, or do we say that you are in Blythe and that's it, and you are in Wingham and that's it, or do we treat ourselves like a proper company and rotate between all facilities for security of the running of the 2 facilities?
So that's a very good question, Your Worship. So in response, just to advise council may or may not have recalled during COVID, we've been doing a lot of cross-training, and that is so that we can provide, we've cross-trained our staff, and we're still in the process a bit of cross-training staff because we have seasonal operations such as the campground. But we have been working toward cross-training our staff so they can work at both facilities.
Thank you. Anita?
Thank you, Reeve Bailey. This is a more general question. Is there any opportunity to make the job more attractive for part-timers, to give part-timers benefits, or is that never done?
Through your worship, that would be a conversation, I would think, more with the CAO and council. It's not part of the package that we currently have for part-timers.
Okay. I think it might be worth looking into that. I think a lot of people are looking for, well, 30 hours is quite a bit of hours already, to see if we can offer some benefits there, if that's possible, but I don't know how to...
Thank you. Kevin?
Thank you. Through you, to Vicky. Is it just the ice making operators that we've been having difficulty managing the hours for, or are you short in staff at all in the aquatics or in the fitness area?
Through your worship, there is an aquatics staffing shortage across the board, across actually the province, and at this point, it's definitely being felt everywhere. It may be something that we're going to have to look at down the road, because there's a lot of part-time, or a lot of aquatics is not a position that you can, even at an instructor level, that you can just walk in as your first-time job. You have to be trained and certified to do the instruction and teach the lessons and guard the facility. So we're definitely in that end of things. We are competing with restaurants and even ourselves with some of our own part-time staff, where a part-time staff member or a seasonal staff member that's a student that comes on board and with no experience can make more in another department than they do in aquatics. But at this point, we're not dealing with that issue. We feel that we should be fine for this fall.
Thank you very much. Any other questions or concerns? Trevor?
Yeah, Reeve, I just wanted to follow up to, Councillor Van Henderson's comment about, benefits for part-time or whatever. I think this goes back to my comment back a few months ago, is we need to make our, straight across the board, we need to look at to make sure we're competitive in the market. Period. Right from the part-time staff members to the senior management to all of it. Because if we are thinking that we are in the market, and we are definitely not, then it doesn't matter what we do. And I mean, arguably, we are going to fight amongst ourselves for employees, and from a county, from the lower tier municipalities, we're all feeling the same stretches. So to me, we need to make sure we're competitive. Whatever that means, we need to ensure, whether it's benefits, we need to do a market analysis about what that looks like. And that needs to come to council to ensure that we understand where we are. I know there has been some communication or some comments by staff about that market study is going to be coming. I think it's got to come sooner rather than later. Like we're behind the 8 ball now a little bit, and I think we're all, senior management's feeling it, council's feeling it from our hiring of trying to hire senior management positions. We're behind the 8 ball. And I mean, that's the problem that this municipality is going to run into, and this is not new to us.
Thank you.
Are you ready?
Go ahead.
And also towards Deputy Reeve Sipes' comments, residents are demanding a higher service level, and we want to provide them with that, but we don't have any ideas how to get there, and I think that's important. If we have to raise taxes, or if we have to change things around for part-time, full-time workers, it doesn't matter. Residents are expecting something from the community, from their facilities, and I think the survey is really, some more information is really appreciated.
Thank you. So hearing the concerns from council, I'm wondering if council wants to, so do you want Vicky to bring back a report, keeping in mind that we had some hockey players in here just a couple of weeks ago that want to get up and going, and I'm not sure what's all involved and how long Vicky would take to do this. So council has to really think this one over. but I want council to kind of make it clear to me. Would you like a report back from Vicky on what Paul was talking about and Trevor? Or do you want to move forward because we know that the hockey mums and dads are out here and they want it to go? Or can we find a combination of both? And I'm going to turn it over to Trevor first of all.
So I'm going to make I'm going to take the recommended motion from the Director of Recreation Facilities. However, I'm going to add to it. And I'm going to say, and further that, council direct the Director of Recreation Facilities to provide a costing report as it relates to the other options to consider, meaning number one, operating the one arena for 2022 and 2023, or reducing the operations at one or both facilities. So that report will come to council regardless of whether they're successful or not successful in the hiring practice of these operators. The Director of Finance is already bringing that report as it relates to the operation of the facility based on our other recommendation when the associations were here. So my recommendation is to do what the facility is exactly what the recommendation is, but adding Councillor Heffer's comment as to getting that report for those other costing options.
I'm going to move it over to Kevin.
I just wanted to add one comment that if we bring back recommendations on 1 and 2, reducing hours on both facilities or operating one arena, let's not kid ourselves. We know which arena it's going to be. Because if you close one arena, you're going to close the pool too. You're going to close the fitness center because the guy that runs the pool runs after the ice looks after the pool. So I don't see operating one arena for the season to bring back a report unless you bring back a report of how much we're going to save by the pool not being open and everything else that goes with it. I think that it's an open-ended question. I know which one, what report would come back.
Other councillors? Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Reeve. I think, I understand what Councillor Faulkner is saying. There is a big concern, but I still think it's a good idea to know, have the information, and then we make an intelligent decision if we can't get enough replacement of staff. Because something's going to break. Something has to break. So it's better that we're educated as to which way it would go. For me, the big one is if we reduce the facilities hours, how does that affect the hockey teams and things like that for the winter anyways? So it's vital information, but I understand what you're saying.
So just before I hand it over to Trevor, I want to speak up. So I don't think it's a wise idea, honestly, to pretend we're going to close one of the arenas, because I don't think we need to close one of the arenas, or should we close one of the arenas. This council's brought this community a long ways to work together, and I think that may not be something, a road we want to go down, number one. Number two, our staff are way too busy to bring us back reports that we may not use. So I'm just concerned, and Deputy Sipes, he's to a lot of meetings too, so he understands that this, when we ask these things, it's a bit of a burden. The final thing I do want to say is, I'm really banging the drum about what's happening with the hospitals, and this is no different. If we allow ourselves to not fund properly and keep arenas open, hospitals open, schools open, they are going to close, because we need to go after funding from upper tier governments to keep them open. We need to keep pounding the drum, and we need to keep them open. And this hospitals are going to be one that I point out right now. If you keep watching what's going on and follow the last 10 years, go back to 97 when they were going to close their hospitals back then, they will tell us that there's nobody to work in the hospital, so it's closed. And we will have one hospital in Huron County. Now, I don't want to go on and on about that, but I look at this the same way. So I want council to think very clearly when you ask for something, is that the direction you want to go in? As Mr. Faulkner said, And I agree that I don't think we should be talking about closing any of them, because I think there's enough usage out there. It's just the problem, we don't have enough staff. And you should never base your company on staff. The staff will slowly and surely come around. Having said that, Trevor, you wanted to speak again?
Yeah, I mean, what the recommendation is suggesting is you're going to hire first. And if hiring is unsuccessful, then that report's gonna have to come back anyways. Because if we don't have the staff, one of those two things are going to have to happen. It's not when, it's if you're not successful. So, and again, nowhere does it say staff are providing a recommendation. If we're asking for that report, let's be clear, it's gonna be this council or the next council that makes the decision on what operations we're gonna do, not staff recommendation. So, I mean, my position was, do the hiring. Let's get it started tomorrow. If that is unsuccessful, then we have that report that has already been requested to come back to ensure that what happens is that we're not waiting for that report. I mean, if those things can happen in unison, it shouldn't be wait for we are unsuccessful, then wait 2 or 3 more weeks for a report. Like, those things are in unison, and then if we're not successful, council has the report. Now we have to need to decide what we're gonna do. So, I mean, that's the recommendation that I thought that I was providing. If I was unclear, I'm hoping that's clear.
Anyone else? Go ahead, Rick.
Yeah, sewer Bailey. We gotta push and push and push for hiring, and I don't believe in shutting down both arenas. Gotta keep them going. We gotta keep them going for what the public wants, for what they pay for. That's my comment.
And everybody, please understand, this is not North Huron doing this. This is a phenomenon all over Canada. We right now don't have a treasurer. We can't come up with a treasurer. We have somebody helping us out today here, right beside me, that's not from our community, is not one of our employees. So we got to start working with other municipalities, maybe to switch help back and forth or whatever to keep things open. So this is not something that North Huron brought on or North Huron wants to do. At the end of the day, though, again, we have many positions open because of retirements mostly, and we can't seem to fill them. And we continually try. And Trevor and I both have had our hands full and headaches to no end with trying to hire someone to fill the positions. So, okay, so go ahead, Kevin.
Thank you. Through you, I fully agree with your analogy about the hiring across the board in all of our municipalities. But I want to make one statement of my my thought process is that with all the other staffing problems that we do have in the municipality, not once has a report come to council with an option of, let's close the municipality. Oh, let's cut out. We don't need that portion of our municipality anymore. Or we don't need these people in our staff anymore. But time after time after time, in this an entity of our municipality's infrastructure comes back time and time again of closing something, of taking away, or who gets what and who doesn't get what. That was my only comment, was that if you're going to you want to operate one arena, well, we know which one's going to be. You don't. Well, if you close the Wingham one, you don't have a pool. You don't have a. But it's not going to work. But it doesn't work that way. Mm-hmm. And I'm just tired of every time a piece of paper comes by for the rec department, it's doom or gloom, and it's shut down the whole thing if we can't hire 2 people. I find that other departments are missing people, but they manage. They without having to come to council and predict doom and gloom. I I'm almost to the point where I'm tired of repeating myself every other council meeting.
I'm going to go to Paul, then I'm going to go to Chris.
Yes, through you, Reeve. All I'm asking for is a report so we can make a good decision if we don't hire the things. And I think that's what Deputy Reeve Sipes said. It's to come out and show us if we have to go that route, we do. And numbers count, like we don't even know. Do we need 2 arenas? Like, remember, we're not 9,000 people and they have 1 arena, one of them. That's all they got. We have 2 for 5,000, so every tax dollar is mentioned some about tax dollars. We have to be fiscal responsible, and if we don't get a report, we'll never know. That's all I'm saying. Thank you, Reeve.
Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, thank you, Reeve. Yeah, Vicky's report, it spells it out that labor or staffing is so critical. And it would be with, say, Jamie's division as well. Like if she lost 10 people, guess what? Something doesn't get graded, something doesn't get mowed, the lawns cut, like something gives. But with rec, it's just so crucial to have that balance of staff and the workload. And if you're missing, like she mentioned here, that there's a few that are thinking about retirement. Well, oh boy, that's going to be down the road, more headaches to fill those positions. So I'm all for bumping up a part-timer to a full-timer. At this point, I would not consider benefits for part-time because you're setting quite a precedence. You know, how many hours is considered a part-time, but that's another argument. But it's just so critical, the staffing issue here. So, but none of us are saying close anything, but like I said, I want to know how would we operate both arenas for less hours, and is that functional? Like that'd be the best report for me, I think for all of us. So I think it's critical. I'd like to second, we haven't seconded the motion yet.
No, thank you for reminding me, because my next question is, Deputy Sipe, could you repeat what you wanted to add on there for the clerk here,
Yeah.
for the...
So I'm doing the recommendation as presented from the Director of Finance. And then I'm adding, and further that Council authorize the Director of Recreation and Community Services to provide a report if hiring is unsuccessful, a report to the other costing method, to the other report, other options as provided to consider in the report dated July 25th, 2022. Is that, I think that is about as clear as I can make it.
Okay, we're just going to give this young lady time to get that down.
So I'm not sure I have it exactly as you wrote it, so as I read it,
Yep.
if you want to correct me,
Yep.
that's good. Okay, so I'll read the whole motion. That the Council of the Township of North Huron hereby receives the report of the Director of Recreation and Community Services dated July the 25th, 2022, regarding the staffing levels of the recreational facilities for information purposes. And further, that Council authorizes the Director of Recreation and Community Services to transition 2 part-time recreation facility operator 2 positions to 2 full-time recreation facilities operator 2 positions. And further, that Council authorizes the Director of Recreation and Community to recruit an additional full-time recreation facilities operator 2 position. And further, that Council authorizes the Interim Director of Finance to amend the 2022 budget to reflect the increased costs as indicated in Staff Report RC 2022-09. And further, that Council authorize the Director of Recreation and Community Services to provide a report if hiring is unsuccessful, a report to the other options as provided to consider for the July 25th, 2022 meeting.
For the other, for the other options to be considered within the report of July 25th, 2022.
I would just like to point one thing out, and it's fine. There is a motion on the floor, but July 2022, is that not getting us really close to lame duck? And then we would be making a major decision if she couldn't get the hired help. As to what Kevin Faulkner's saying, that could be a major decision that would affect the next council, and we only have 6 weeks to go or whatever it is. I just want to point that out and just give you that thought. Take that thought for a minute.
Yeah, so as we understand, under lame duck, the CAO is designated under that section. He's designated authority to do what he needs to do to keep the municipality moving. He is not going, without him being here, but knowing who Dwayne is, I know for a fact he's not going to make a significant decision about those two options without a council. And I mean, that only goes if there's less than 75% of the members are not getting reelected. So we have to recognize that municipality has to move on, regardless. We're not tying anybody's hands. I think we have to recognize that report's going to come, and there's going to have to be, this is going to bring public consultation, lots of conversation with the public and everything else. It's not an answer. I don't think we're going down that road, but I think we have to be prudent to get the report on the docket, because if we don't, we're late.
Again, I'm just going to voice my concern that July 22nd does mean that we are still not in lame duck. We can make that decision, and that would be a very large decision to make with a new council coming in. Okay, we have a motion on the, go ahead, Vicky, sorry.
Through you, your worship, and I apologize because I know it's not proper protocol for me to speak right now, but I just want to tie back to something I said, that if by chance I can get a part-time person, for instance, the manager who's retiring, to fill a part-time position that we don't have to make it full-time, I would really like to have that permission to do that.
And is that in the motion, Trevor? Vicky?
It's not as of right now. I mean,
Okay.
To me though, that's not, like, we have those vacant positions, right? Like, I mean, if we have a part-time position vacant, and that particular individual is accepting of that position, that's not a council requirement. I mean, you have an open vacancy. The only time it needs council's approval is if you're adding another staff, or you're trying to make somebody from part-time to full-time. So unless I'm missing something, I don't think that we need it in the motion, because if that is one of the opportunities to be part-time, and we have that opening already, council doesn't need to make a motion, in my opinion. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Vicky.
Vicky?
No, through you, your worship, I'm fine with that. I just wanted to make sure that that was still, that council was aware that if I can do that, I will do that.
Thank everyone kindly. Okay, do you want the motion read back one more time, or are we good?
We're good.
Good? Okay, I have a mover, I believe, Trevor?
Yes.
Seconder is Chris.
I have
All in?
I have a request.
Yep,
I feel it might become an issue later, so I would like a recorded vote at this time.
okay. Recorded vote it is.
You're gonna have to give me a second.
Lucky you. First day on the job.
Where am I looking for the report? In eScribe?
Can't help you with that one. But we can do it verbally and add it in after the fact.
Okay. We're gonna do it the old-fashioned way.
That's good. You just call out each name as you go, and they'll give you a yes or no.
Okay, Councillor Ben Henderson?
Yes.
Counselor Palmer?
Yes.
Counselor McBurney?
No.
Counselor Sipe?
Yes.
Counselor Faulkner?
No.
And Counselor Hopper? Yes?
Reed Bailey's a no.
1, 2, 3, 4 yeses, and 1, 2, 3 noes.
Okay, so on a recorded vote, 4-3, it passes. Okay, thank you very kindly, Vicky. Moving on to 5.2, Township of North Huron Official Plan 5-Year Review Update on the process. Hannah Hallman, you're up now. Hannah Hallman and Company, you're up now.
Thank you, Council, for having us this evening. If you just give me a moment, I'm just going to get my presentation on the computer. Is it possible to have the lights dim just for the presentation?
Kevy, you're slipping.
Start by welcoming everyone. This evening is a public meeting for the North Huron Official Plan Review. As Council will remember, we've been going through this process for some months. We have had the open houses with the community, and the purpose of this evening is to hold a public meeting.
And again, thank you, Council, for having us this evening. So again, as Denise mentioned, just because tonight is a public meeting, just to have a refresher on what an official plan is. It is a policy document that directs land use in the township. It includes land use designations or mapping, as well as policy/text. The purpose is to have the vision and goals of the community reflected in policies for growth, development, and resource protection. Again, the purpose of the official plan review that was initiated, as Denise mentioned earlier this year. The current official plan was adopted in 2004, last updated and reviewed in 2013. The Planning Act does require that the official plan be reviewed every 5 years. As well, the purpose of the review is to incorporate recent updates to the provincial policy statement as well as the county official plan, in which the document is required to be consistent with and conform to. And it is also an opportunity to update the policies and mapping to better reflect the current and future land use priorities in the township. Again, the purpose of this public meeting, this is a statutory public meeting that's required to be held under the Planning Act as part of the 5-year review. It is an opportunity for members of the public to address council on any matters related to the official plan before council considers a final draft amendment. And it also provides staff an opportunity to provide an overview of the process, including some outcomes from the public consultation since the open houses. As well, it is an opportunity to discuss the draft changes to the document. So council will note that they have received the second version of the text amendment, as well as the second draft version of the mapping changes. And that the first draft was received in March. So this change does incorporate some changes since that time. In terms of a review timeline, so again, the first statutory public meeting in the process was held in February. Again, in March, the first version of the draft amendment was presented to council and discussed in a workshop with council and staff. The public open houses were held in April. And this evening, the second version of the draft amendment is being presented to council, and again, the holding of a second statutory required public meeting. And it is anticipated in terms of next steps, depending on direction, that a final draft amendment will be presented to North Huron Council with a recommendation. That's anticipated to be in early September. And after which, in terms of the process, North Huron Council makes a recommendation to the county, and then County Council will consider a decision on the official plan amendment after North Huron Council provides direction. In terms of a summary of our consultation, just to give an overview of some of the actions that were taken, staff did send letters to all landowners with any designation or mapping changes, so over 300 letters were sent. The balance of all other landowners in North Huron did receive a general letter in the mail informing them of the process, as well as the open houses in April. Staff received a very good turnout at the open houses, and in particular the 2 in-person meetings in Blythe and Wingham in April, with approximately 90 people in attendance. And the forum did allow staff to speak with individual property owners about any changes specifically on their properties, as well as general policy changes. We also were available to have correspondence with members of the public via phone, emails, or site visits. And so far we have been able to connect with 32 different households. We also did have discussions with key landowners in Blythe. This is a process that is still undergoing, but we have chatted with approximately 6 different individuals that have key properties in Blythe. In terms of continuing our consultation summary, we also did meet with a number of agencies and community groups. We did meet with the Huron Pioneer Threshers and Hobby Association on site April 12th on the Blythe Community Center property. We did meet with the Blythe Festival. We did have a discussion with BM Ross as a representative for the township's engineer, mostly to talk about servicing capacity. We did also have consultation with Maitland Valley Conservation Authority, as well as the source water protection officials. So they have provided official comments, those 2 agencies that were included in council's package, and those recommendations from those agencies have been incorporated into the draft document, as well as staff had an in-person meeting with members of the Amish community in June.
So as Hannah mentioned, we sent out 300 letters that included the mapping changes. So what residents would have received was an aerial photograph of their property that showed the area that had previously been designated and then where changes were proposed. Some of those changes would have affected agriculture, others would have affected natural environment areas, some involved urban settlement areas. There was a couple that had community facilities or maybe the edge of an aggregate designation. And so most of the landowners, when they arrived at the open house, they sort of had their letter with them. And so to me, that really indicated that was a really effective way of getting the information across. They were coming in, they had reviewed the letter, they understood the changes, but they might have had a few additional questions. And so it was a really wonderful opportunity to engage with them at the open house. And I can't stress to council enough how important and effective it was to have that consultation in person. It made an incredible difference from my perspective. Through that consultation process, we had the opportunity to sit down with the farmers, with the landowners. They know their properties best. And there were times where, a natural environment area could have been better defined in the mapping, or there might have been changes on the landscape since the time that the picture was taken in 2020. For example, a barn might have been built and wasn't then reflected in the mapping. So we took that input and we made changes to the mapping as necessary. For those individuals where changes were made, we did send them a revised, updated copy. I know that happened for some members of council, just to provide that follow through to make sure that they were satisfied in the mapping changes. For anyone who had questions, who perhaps, we told them if you're not satisfied with your change, certainly able to come and address council in person and let them know that, or they could provide us an email, and we said we would provide that feedback to council. To date, no one has contacted us with any objections to the mapping. So what we heard, there's a number of changes that were integrated as part of the public feedback. And again, I think it just stresses the importance of getting out there, talking to people in the community so that we can, as planners, sort of apply our lens. And as we hear the situation they're in, we can start to think forward as to, you know, how can we maybe not address an existing problem, but avoid a future problem. And so I've used the example of the house and mill. It was identified to us that they have been very strategic in purchasing some properties in close proximity to the mill for the purpose of helping to ward off any land use compatibility in the future. They had asked whether or not it would be permissible if they were to use those properties, for example, for some off-site parking. They also indicated that a portion of the lands to the north of the mill are actually owned by the province of Ontario, but they have a long-term lease to have some operations there. And so again, we recognize that that wasn't well reflected in the plan, and so we've introduced a special policy area, again, subject to site plan control, so it will still have that additional level of oversight for that special policy area, but really helps us to allow an existing industry to maximize the use of their properties and maintain, as we say, that land use compatibility with the surrounding residential area. Again, we did receive some feedback in general in terms of folks wanting to have smaller agricultural parcels in terms of the minimum lot size. So currently the minimum lot size is 38 hectares or about 100 acres in North Huron. And, you know, there certainly was some discussion about, you know, the difficulty in farming. Certainly for young people trying to enter into agriculture, it's very difficult. And so the feeling was, you know, would there ever be consideration for going down to 50 acres? There was also some feeling about natural environment policies. Could we consider 50 acres in that case? So I'll talk about that a little bit later. At this time, I can say that neither of those changes have been incorporated as a recommendation from staff. The discussion around 50-acre farms is certainly something that is had from time to time. And from our perspective as planners, as well as in consultation with local farm groups and farmers themselves, they recognize that in order to allow for the continual flexibility for changes in agriculture moving into the future, we don't want to see the fragmentation of the land base. And so we'd like to see that minimum lot size stay at 38 hectares, or roughly 100 acres. One of the most common questions we had at the open house was about municipal drainage, drains, and how to get a municipal drain, how to have a municipal drain maintained, how double checking where are the catchment areas, where do they start and stop for various drains. And again, I thought this was very interesting because it starts to you know, reflect that folks have noticed, right? And what some of the comments were was that it's the high intensity rain events that we've been seeing, and they're noticing that there's areas on their farms that have, you know, obviously not responded as well, and as a result, they're starting to look at drainage. So I just thought that was really interesting, and we certainly did pass everybody on to the drainage superintendent. We gave him a bit of a heads up as to why he might be experiencing an increase in calls. Generally, the ARU, so that stands for Additional Residential Unit. So this is some of the changes coming down from the provincial level, the More Homes, More Choices Act. We have incorporated additional permissions for additional residential units in all scenarios within the township. So if we're looking at someone who has an agricultural setting, someone who's in Wingham or in Blythe, and one of the fully service settlement areas, really looking at trying to create some more flexible housing options. And it was very well received. We had a lot of questions about this and people looking forward to maybe making that investment. So the other consultation I'd like to draw your attention to did happen since the open houses, and we were very careful, I wanted to say, in the timing of the open house. So the original open houses were at the end of April, and we wanted to be very clear that we were prior to the planting season. This occurred after planting, but obviously before anyone was into wheat as they are now. So we wanted to be very thoughtful about accommodating the community in requesting these types of in-person sessions. For the consultation with the Amish community, we were able to have an in-person meeting at the new schoolhouse on Belfast Road. And in addition to Hannah and myself, we also had the new North Huron Economic Development Officer, Dimitri, join us. I think it was just a really great opportunity to be able to discuss a wide range of issues with that community that would have implications not only for planning, but for economic development. So it was a really great discussion. They, again, were very supportive of the additional residential unit policies, and we did discuss that on their farms, the intensity of the way in which they farm does require more farm labor. And so in some cases, while they may be related to the folks who, or not related to those who would come to live in the additional residential units, they definitely have an interest in that. And I think we also talked about, with COVID and with other things, they've certainly recognized that those enlarged dwellings are not ideal, and having a little bit more space between would be better. When we had the discussion with the Amish community, the farmers did also raise their request was that they would like to see an opportunity to take 10 acres off of a 100-acre farm. And again, this is an attempt to try to retain their community. They have many young people who are not able to purchase a farm, and so they wanted to see an opportunity for them to sever off 10 acres. They'd be able to have a house, a market garden, and maybe an industry type of business, sawmill or something of the like. And we did have a full discussion with them about why that policy couldn't be supported. But we did talk about the transition to on-farm diversified uses and how their home industries can get larger on-farm now as it changes the province made in 2017 than they would have in prior years. So it's certainly good to touch base, as I say, with people from time to time. There have been changes and we want to make them aware of that. And then they can, we can work together to identify new opportunities.
So just for the next section, we are going to provide a summary of the key proposed amendments to the policies / the text. There is a summary also included in the report to council. In terms of in the agriculture designation, we did make updates to the implementation of the minimum distance separation formula. Council will recall that this is a requirement if you're going to be citing any sensitive uses such as residential units in proximity to livestock barns or manure storage facilities. And the direction on that is provided by a provincial guideline. So we have made updates to the plan to reflect the current guideline. One of those changes includes recognizing that rural cemeteries be considered as less sensitive land uses, as they are generally more of a low visitation type cemetery than perhaps some cemeteries that you would see in urban areas. So that is something that is proposed, and as a result of that, there will typically be less lengthy setbacks to any new barns or manure facilities in that case. As Denise mentioned as well, there is new direction from the province with respect to on-farm diversified uses. So the existing policies that speak to permitting home occupations and home industries have been consolidated into the on-farm diversified uses policy, as well as there is direction provided for agritourism uses as accessory to agricultural uses. We have also provided direction for additional residential units. One of these changes did occur following the open houses. In terms of some of the feedback that we received for people that were on parcels located in the agricultural area, but they weren't necessarily engaged in commercial scale farming. So these are what we would call our agricultural small holdings properties. They're typically zoned AG4 in the zoning bylaw. And they're those smaller, more residential lots that don't have a farmland with them or a barn, for example. And the direction from that was that they also desired some more flexible options to permit additional residential units, and in particular in separate buildings. So just specifically in terms of the additional residential unit direction, it is proposed that for farms engaged in commercial scale agriculture, so again, this is your parcels that are typically going to be zoned AG1, general agriculture, and they may have an existing residence that is accessory to an agricultural use on their property, that they would be permitted to have 2 additional residential units. And these can be located either within the existing main farm dwelling building or in an accessory building. Keeping in mind that we are still proposing that the existing garden suite provisions, which allow for a mobile home to be on the property subject to a temporary use bylaw, or accommodations for farm labor will also be continued to be permitted. And then for properties not engaged in the commercial scale agriculture, so these are your agricultural small holdings where the residential use is the main use, we are proposing that a single additional residential unit be permitted. and that this be either located within the main dwelling or an accessory building. So this was one of the main feedbacks that we did here following the open house, and there is a letter from a member of the public that speaks to this. Is just there's a lot of desire in the community that rather than pursuing a garden suite, which would be a mobile home, a structure that's temporary and can be removed, they would prefer to invest in a more permanent structure, such as having an additional residential unit in an accessory building.
So I want to just, for the next steps for this policy, so council understands, what the official plan is going to say is that the ARUs are required to be in close proximity to the main dwelling. We'll then put a number to it when we get to the zoning stage. The number that's been rolled out across the county is 60 meters. So a maximum distance of 60 meters between the main dwelling and the additional residential unit, and that is the number that we've been proposing for North Huron. So it's around 200 feet is the separation distance. They are required to share a laneway. Something next file. They are not going to be required to share either septic or a well, but we certainly encourage them to share certainly the well and if possible the septic, but we recognize that's not always practical. I would also state that yes, meeting MDS requirements is also required for these ARUs. So that's really one of the most important pieces about keeping it in close proximity to the dwelling. Number one is that we want to be very clear, these units will not be able to be severed in future. So by clustering them within the main dwelling, it helps to ward off that future pressure for severance. The other is that we don't want to make an undue impact on neighboring livestock operators from being able to site a new barn.
In terms of the natural environment section, the approach that is proposed with respect to the mapping and the designations is that it would reflect the latest information. So as was discussed heavily at the earlier workshop with council, staff did review all the features on the ground from an aerial view with our GIS mapping team. And that has been incorporated in what we're calling the natural environment update, just to ensure that the mapping does accurately reflect the features on the ground. And we have also proposed to incorporate mapping provided by the Maitland Valley Conservation Authority in terms of their hazardous lands and in particular their floodplain. So the approach in our rural areas, so the East Waumanosh ward outside of the settlement areas, is that if it's a natural environment designated feature, then that is the designation there, whether there is a floodplain or not. And then in terms of the areas where there is an agriculture designation, if there is also a floodplain present from the Maitland Valley Conservation Authority, we have proposed that the designation be agriculture with flood. The intent of that is to be transparent with the public that there may be a flood hazard there and that they should consult with the Maitland Valley Conservation Authority. The intent with that is not that they would have to do an official plan amendment if they wanted to build there, but it's just to be transparent and to make sure that all those checks and balances are in place. As sometimes we find that members of the public may only refer to one document and they don't necessarily go to the Conservation Authority for mapping. In terms of our urban areas, it's proposed that the floodplain be an overlay over the existing designations. So that's proposed to be on the schedules, and that would be for reference. It wouldn't necessarily form part of the designation. And then as part of this, we've also proposed 3 new appendices. So the appendices to the official plan is provided for reference or for information, and that includes the 2-zone flood mapping from the Conservation Authority. Again, just so that members of the public are aware if there is a flood hazard there. In terms of the natural environment, we have also included policies to recognize the stewardship of landowners. And in particular, we have referenced the Huron County Clean Water Program, which does offer grants to landowners to engage in some stewardship initiatives. In terms of the adjacent lands policies, so the purpose of the adjacent lands policies is that if you're in a certain proximity to a natural environment feature, you may be required to do, if you wanted to do any development in that area, such as building a new building, you may be required to do an environmental impact study, or it may need to be looked at closer by staff, and you may not be required to do it, but it's an area that you would have to look at a little bit closer. In terms of the direction for that, it is proposed that the adjacent lands be 120 meters to provincially significant wetlands, and 50 meters to all other natural environment features. This is a change from the current direction in which previously locally significant wetlands were also included in that 120 meter adjacent lands, and that has since been proposed to be reduced to 50 meters. So at this point, it would just be the provincially significant wetlands that have that larger adjacent lands. In terms of our urban settlement areas, a lot of the the bulk of the changes are related to residential intensification, housing. So there are policies that further encourage intensification and affordable housing to facilitate a mix of residential unit types to meet demand. A key part of facilitating intensification will be for consideration of the existing neighborhoods with respect to urban design. Council will recall that they did adopt the county's residential intensification guidelines, which include best practices for urban design, in particular intensification in residential areas. So things like infilling development or increasing the number of units in established neighborhoods. These policies have been adapted to include reference to this document in lieu of some of the existing urban design direction that was less prescriptive and a bit more subjective. However, much of the existing urban design direction does remain in the document.
So in terms of the new residential density framework, low, medium, and high, we really revamped these entirely if you read through. And what we're looking at is that in the low density areas, so the R1 zone, it would be up to 2 stories. In medium density, it would go to 3, and then high density would be 3 and greater. So when we move on to the zoning stage, we'd be looking to do pre-zoning of select sites, and particularly areas near our downtown cores, where we may pre-zone them at 4 stories, for example. And again, the goal there is to try to permit as much development as of right, which means they don't need to come to council for an official plan amendment or for a zoning bylaw amendment, and ideally not for a minor variance. They would move straight to what's called site plan control and the building permit process. The goal here is to streamline development so that we can deliver more residential units in a quicker, more predictable way. And we've talked about additional residential units in all urban contexts, being very careful that again in those areas such as Whitechurch or Belgrave, where we are relying on septic systems, we need to make sure that it is appropriate in terms of a nitrate capacity to add additional residential units. But the department has created a guide, really helpful when you're particularly in an urban context and you're thinking about, how might I add an additional residential unit to my fully serviced property? And it walks through a number of different ways in which you might do it. We've received some pretty good feedback on the document so far. Lots of checklists, try to make it easy for people to use it.
Just continuing along with the urban settlement area designation changes, as mentioned before, in terms of incorporating natural hazard or floodplain mapping, this is proposed to be integrated as an overlay. So the designations wouldn't actually be changed to, residential with flood, but it would be an overlay on the schedules so that members of the public are aware that there may be a flood hazard there and they need to speak with the Conservation Authority. We also have policies to enhance active transportation infrastructure requirements, particularly in greenfield areas. So just ensuring that there's lots of walkways or trails just to provide those connections to key areas in the community and community facilities. In terms of the mineral aggregate resources designation, not a lot of changes to the existing policy. However, we do have a new policy that does require that you would consider the cumulative impacts of new pits in proximity to any existing pits that exist there. This is generally already happening in practice, but this is a policy just to formalize that, and it also aligns with the provincial policy statement direction, which requires that the cumulative impact be considered for these pits in terms of impacts for traffic and noise and any hydrological impacts. In terms of community-wide policies, there is a new section on source water protection policies. So these were developed in consultation with the source water protection officials. And in particular, there are policies regarding the lot creation in wellhead protection areas that are on septic servicing. So this would omit the areas that have full servicing, so Blythe and Wingham, and eventually Hutton Heights, where there is majority of the development is proposed to go. But in areas such as Belgrade, Auburn, or Whitechurch, which do have wellhead protection areas, there is specific direction that if you are going to create a new lot that will be on a septic system, you need to demonstrate that that septic system be located outside of the wellhead protection area where the vulnerability score is 10. So that's again on the advice of the source water protection officials and aligns with their policies. We do include a new section on energy conservation and climate change. Generally, these policies encourage the development of active transportation infrastructure, linkages with natural areas, remediation of contaminated lands, brownfields, for example, and a criteria to evaluate any proposed renewable energy projects. So again, in response to the province appealing the Green Energy Act, we have developed a criteria in which council would have direction to evaluate any renewable energy projects in terms of impacts to resources in the community. So just continuing along with community-wide policies, clarification has been given to the requirements for when heritage impact assessments will be required with respect to properties that are designated as heritage properties, and providing more direction to requirements for archaeological assessments, and in particular requiring that consultation with local Indigenous communities be required to align with provincial direction as well as the county official plan. The community improvement section has been updated to reference the township's community improvement plan, which has since been developed since the last update. In terms of open space and parkland policies, there has been additional policies added to promote the creation of open space linkages and recreational trails. Again, just reinforcing policies to encourage active transportation. In terms of land division policies, as Denise mentioned earlier, at this time there are no major changes proposed. So we are still proposing that the minimum lot area for agricultural severances be maintained at 38 hectares, which is approximately just under 100 acres. We do have an additional policy that accounts for lot creation for infrastructure or utilities in the agricultural designation as an exception for lot creation. And again, just including references to the aforementioned source water protection policies for lot creation and wellhead protection areas for properties that will be on private septic systems.
I'm going to walk through some of the designation and major mapping changes. We're not going to go through all of them. They've been provided to council for your review in terms of all the concession mapping. We're going to focus in on some of the changes to the urban policies. As we discussed at the outset of this process, over the past 5 years, Blythe has seen some considerable change. And so we wanted to take a chance to have a very close look at Blythe to make sure that those changes were properly reflected in this review of the official plan. And I'm going to walk through the areas that you see highlighted on the screen. So we're going to start on the east, or the west end, rather. There is an existing community facility designation, which is directly west of the Threshers property and goes up against sort of the G2G trail, as sort of that hard line you can see to the north. In reviewing the history behind this designation, we received a few different stories as to why it may have come to be. But the fact is that there's no road access to this designation from County Road 25. There's actually a significant drainage feature throughout this area. And in discussion with the current landowner, we felt that it really was no longer appropriate. So we had the opportunity to discuss, the fact is that on the Highway 25 corridor, as it moves east-west through Blythe, there are very few vacant highway commercial lands. As council can picture, on the east side of the intersection, we have the vet office, the tractor dealership, trucking facility and whatnot. There really aren't a lot of vacancies there. And so what we're proposing is that at the sort of the front of this property along Highway 25, the area outlined in the orange hatch will be designated highway commercial, and in the yellow to the rear would be residential. which clearly aligns with the area to the east along Thresher's Lane, which is also residential. So an opportunity to, as I say, open up a new highway commercial opportunity at this location on County Road 25, and removing the area to the rear, which is with the black hatch, and really is not conducive to a development. We have spoken with the landowner, and they are pleased with this change. Next, we'll go to the top part of the screen. We are now on North Street, and council will see that we have redefined the existing edge of the natural environment area. So that's the green hatch over top of the orange. That's the natural environment as it exists on the municipality's property. This is the Blythe sewage treatment plant. And as well to the south, we've realigned the existing natural environment designation to kind of match that farm field. In fact, it will be designated residential, but do keep in mind that there is a setback of 100 meters to a sewage treatment facility for any sensitive use, which would include residential. So in fact, those lands that are immediately east of the sewage treatment plant will never be able to be developed in their entirety. But there would be the opportunity, for example, to locate, let's say the stormwater management facility, that could go within 100 meters, but not the dwellings themselves. Council will also note just at the top left-hand side of the screen, you're going to note a red. That is a historic pioneer cemetery that was not previously designated community facility, so we've incorporated that. Moving down on the screen, you're going to see a number of changes along the G to G. With the improvement on that trail, we took a really close look and were able to do a number of small revisions that more accurately reflect the extent of the trail. And finally, at the west end of Dinsley Street, what you'll note is that a portion of a privately owned lands was actually designated community facility in error. And similarly, a portion of the Thresher's property was designated residential in error. So we're just tidying that up. Now we're moving back to the north end, back on North Street, and this is a property that's owned by a local farm family, and we are realigning the residential designation to line up with their property line. So really kind of a small jig, but it will make far more sense if and when that property ever comes to be developed for residential purposes. So this is one of those times where we're not necessarily correcting a problem, but we're trying to create perhaps a future opportunity by addressing it now. And last but not least, we are on the east end. This is the existing industrial designation on the very east side of the settlement area, and this also represents the boundary with Morris Turnberry. So on both the east and the south side of this property, it's bordered by the municipal border. So we're just doing a minor sort of data correction on this one. What we'd also like to draw to council's attention for this industrial designation is that it does have access to Dinsley to the north, but it's relatively limited access, and Dinsley Street, as we all know, enters into the urban fabric, which is not ideal from an industrial perspective. In order to achieve access to County Road 25, it would be most easily met if we could go through the lands within Morris Turnberry. So this might be something that in future we have discussions with Morris Turnberry, and it might be an opportunity for the two municipalities to work together to bring about an industrial development on this subject lands. And just to help orient council there, those are the lands to the south of the Hubbard's farm. And as you can see, there is that section between the subject lands and Blythe Road, which are within the municipality of Morris Turnberry, which is why we did not change the designation during this OP review. Finally, I'll draw your attention to the changes we made right in and around Houston. So you can see the area in sort of the purple hatch there is a new special policy area that allows for accessory uses to the mill to be located on these parcels. You can see they are immediately adjacent to the mill. They are all vacant properties today. They've been sort of purchased over time by the mill. And this has been done in close consultation with the owners at the mill, and they are, again, pleased with the outcome. Much less changes in Wingham. The predominant changes is that we've tidied up the mapping to make it a little easier to understand, and specifically in regards to the floodway. So there was some improved floodway mapping done by MVCA, and so what we've done is we've actually removed it from the land use schedule and placed it in a standalone schedule, which Hannah's going to show you in a second. The existing special policy area at the southwest end that deals with that floodplain area is to remain as is. So you can see it there. That's sort of the area that had the former landfills, as well as some floodway policies. And if we just go forward to that next slide, there we are. This shows the extent of the two-zone floodway as it exists within Wingham. So as you can see, it is a fairly significant area, and so just making sure that we are being mindful for those properties that border onto those lands to make sure that, you know, any new development is staying out of harm's way. And finally, in Hutton Heights, you'll see that we are correcting some of the mapping. Some of the natural environment mapping simply was not accurate. And so you can see on the south there, we are adding the existing forest and taking away a few spots to the north.
In terms of our appendices, and again, the purpose of this is for information and for reference. It doesn't necessarily contain designations. These have all since been updated with current data, and there's the proposed addition of new appendices. So as Denise mentioned, again, for the areas that do have the two-zone flood hazard, like Hutton Heights and Wingham, we're proposing that there would be new appendices that include that mapping that is provided by MVCA for information and reference, and again, just to make sure that members of the public are aware of that floodplain mapping. In terms of the direction from staff on this evening, it is recommended again that council does receive the accompanied second draft of the official plan amendment with the proposed policy / text changes and designation / mapping changes for information and discussion this evening. As well, it is again a reminder that this evening is a public meeting, and so council also has the opportunity to receive input from members of the public. In terms of next steps, staff will consider the feedback received this evening from council, members of the public, as well as any additional comments that are received before our next meeting, and we will provide a final draft of the amendment, and it is anticipated that we would bring forward a recommendation for council's consideration in early September. So we are happy to answer any questions about this presentation. And again, keep in mind it is a public meeting, so members of the public are welcome to provide comments. And again, more information is available on the Huron County Connects webpage at the following.
Thank you very much, ladies. I do appreciate it. Now we'll move to, this will be an opportunity for comments from public. Not seeing any hands raised. We're going to now then go to opportunity for the comments and questions from our council. Council, go ahead, Paul.
Yes, thank you, Reeve. I like the idea about the streamlined approach that's coming on with the minor variances. So we shouldn't have to look at any more minor variances in town here then? Am I understanding that right?
In a perfect world, no, we would see a reduction in the number of minor variances. So what we're doing in the official plan is we provide that high-level direction that we want to permit more intensification within the settlement area and allow for denser forms of housing. So what we then do in the zoning bylaw is, for example, we would change the interior side yard setback, which is one of the ones that council commonly amends through a minor variance, from 3 meters down to 1.5 meters. Basically, right, it becomes as of right, and they no longer need to come in for a minor variance. Doesn't mean to say you won't ever see a minor variance. There will be things from time to time that certainly will come up, but the goal is to reduce the number of them.
Okay, and follow up with that, thank you, Reeve. You're talking about the wetlands and whatnot, the 120 meter setback and the 50. We'll never have to worry about, like, let's say a person's wanting to build a pig barn, we had one of those. We won't have to worry about that anymore because that'll already be set in stone. They can't go within that type.
So 120 meters is the adjacent lands. So you're able to potentially build within that area if you demonstrate there will be no negative impacts.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to a provincially significant wetland, most people don't want to make a significant investment in close proximity because the area is really wet, hence why it's called wetland. And so But there may be times, right, where someone might look to propose a barn that's marginally within that area, and there would be an opportunity for them to, as I say, engage with the biologist, do the study, and demonstrate those no negative impacts. So it is possible to build within adjacent areas, but as Hannah said, it's that area where we take a closer look.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Reeve, and through you, Denise and Hannah. These are some points that I brought up back in March, and I'm not seeing any movement, and they're quite important to the agricultural community. One of them is, it says draft amendment number 16, 4.2. It's the goals for agriculture, and there's a few points, and one of them is to encourage farmers to protect and mitigate the impact of climate change. Like, why is that in there? Farmers are one of the best groups of environmentalists out there, because if they fail on their little slice of heaven, their farm, they're out of business. So they do their best. They do more than most people do. And yes, they burn a ton of oil or petroleum because they've got a huge job to do to feed everybody, but they already do a good job, and it's almost insulting that it's there. It should not be there. It's silly. Just silly. That's the best word I can think of. I've got a couple other points.
Do you want them to answer that one first?
Sure, that'd be good.
Girls?
So as you can see within 4.2b, it's an existing policy, and the policy previously read to encourage farm operators to use best management practices that protect and enhance environmental, and it said features. And then we added on to that to talk about mitigating the impacts of climate change. We at the county council has the Clean Water Project, where we regularly partner with farm operators to do stewardship projects, and we certainly recognize, as you said, that the landowners are excellent stewards of the land. So I suppose that this policy, the way you've read this policy, is it comes across as offensive. That's certainly not the intent. And so we could go back and look at some different language. Maybe instead of the word to encourage, maybe it's to work with farm operators, to partner, to learn from each other in terms of best management practices. I think there's a great amount of knowledge out there, and I wouldn't want to see that the idea lost entirely, but maybe it's about the specific verb that we've used that is the problem.
I would accept that if you could reword it, please. And then 4.3.9, it's regarding the Nutrient Management Act. Farmers are required to, you're saying, farmers are required to have only enough land that they can spread the manure of the animals that they house. But that's not true. The Nutrient Management Act supersedes anything that we produce here, and it says as long as the homeowner, farm owner has a nutrient management plan, then they could have as many animals as they want, because then they would make a contract with a neighboring farmer to take the manure. That's the key, that the manure goes somewhere in a safe manner. And that should be in there, or this one taken out totally, because it's irrelevant. Nutrient Management Act takes over.
Right. So again, we could think about combining this one with the one prior, which talks about normal farm practices within the agricultural area. The other thing I would identify is we could include the word access. So all livestock operators shall have access to a sufficient land base available on which to properly apply manure, right? So it's not that they have to own it themselves, but they should have access to it via their plan.
Yeah, and mention too that if they want to do that, they need to have a nutrient management plan.
Mm-hmm. Okay, no, that's fine. We can certainly look at the combination of maybe of those two.
And one more, Reeve.
Yes, sir.
The natural environment, this is the natural environment area in North Huron consists of a list of items, and I brought this one up last March too. F, habitat for endangered and threatened species. Like, that's just something hanging over everybody's head. Tell me what these species are, or else it's a moot point. It means zero to me. I know the biologists would go crazy, and I take offense too that that I can't do anything because, I might have an endangered species that I have no idea what is. You see what I mean? It's insulting in that regard. You've got intelligent people doing farming, and, okay, if we have an endangered species, fine, but I want to know what it is. Because then I can help work with a biologist about that. But just to have a thing hanging over our heads, oh, there might be an endangered species. Nah, that's not satisfying at all. So if you could reword that one, or it's got to be changed, because it's just not fair and it's not right.
Provincial legislation in regards to species at risk, and so I would have less ability to alter the wording here. I'm also not in a position to disclose those species within the township that may be threatened or endangered on the list. And again, we do that for the purpose of protecting the species. If it was made publicly available, publicly knowledge as to where those species are, it's been documented in the past that that has led to their degradation, either through people's, just goodwill interest in going to seek them out and watch and look, or quite frankly, through illegal activities associated with poaching. So that is the reason why we do not. We're not allowed by provincial policy to do that. What it means for the average person, though, I mean, again, if a farmer is cultivating their fields and there was a species there, it's a normal farm practice for them to cultivate their field. There's nothing that's going to stop them from doing that. If, however, they were looking to do a planning application, let's say to establish an aggregate pit, and through the environmental impact study for that new aggregate pit, they were to come across an endangered species. Well, that's when we would then work with the biologist to say, okay, how could we both protect the habitat for this endangered species and allow, the desired land use to proceed? And there would be a series of mitigation measures. So for the average person going about their day-to-day, this doesn't have a limitation on their ability to conduct normal farm practices.
Not on a building, a proposed building or anything? Say they wanted to build a barn, would it get in the way of that?
If it was in an area which could be considered a habitat, we would be looking to see if there was in fact that type of habitat present. And in that case, yes, it could trigger the need for an environmental impact study. For most individuals, if you're looking to build a barn within your existing farm cluster, the likelihood of encountering this type of habitat is extremely low.
Yeah, it's bothersome. One little one, it's not even a concern, but regarding the renewable energy, a wind turbine, its footing, where it is, you hear different things from different municipalities, and I'd sure love to know the truth. That little area of the footing, is it taxable? Does its taxation change? Is it go on the deed? Do you know anything about that?
I don't know the implications under the municipal assessment.
All right.
Anyone else? Trevor? And then Anita.
Yeah, I have just a couple of comments. The talk about additional residential units, and in the conversation of garden suites being and temporary being still available. My comment is, would this be not better served if, and maybe this is more of a comment for council rather than you personally, but if you're going to allow additional residential units, 2 for a commercial property and 1 for not a commercial property is the way I read that, but you're also going to allow garden suites, is the garden suite potentially just the lower cost option? Therefore, my concern is are you never going to get the residential unit because the garden option is always going to be there, other than it's a temporary use and it's got 10-year I think it's a 10-year maximum, but it can be renewed. And my question, I think, is more for council's perspective, but I mean, I look at it as, if you're going to allow residential units, I'm thinking you either allow residential units or you allow the garden suite. You can't, in my mind, you're competing against each other, and you would not get the residential unit because there's always that ability for somebody to put a garden suite in for 10 years, and because of the changeover in councils, you can keep coming back and keep getting it extended. So, I mean, I'm concerned about that part.
So an additional residential unit could be a mobile home. It could be a modular home. It could be a stick-built home. It can be any of those options. Over time, I believe garden suites will become a thing of the past. Why would you come to council, make an application, enter into an agreement, have to name a person when there's another option sitting there which is basically has no rules attached and can achieve the same thing?
Right, so I guess that's my question. I'm questioning why we're even leaving it in there.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, if you're not, because, I mean, we have the tempering ones now, but I'm thinking that if you just don't have it, then you're forcing them to do what you actually want them to do. It's not worse off. They're actually no different. They're actually better off in my mind. And I think ultimately for me, I think that's where I got a little bit confused about the whole, why are we keeping the garden suite in? It seems restrictive when we really don't want them to have that.
It's still an option under the Planning Act. It's under section 39, and so we've left it in there basically because we know that there are some existing garden suites out there, and so we wanted to give them the opportunity that your garden suite's still permitted, and over time, should you meet all the requirements of an ARU, you could then transition into an ARU. But let's say, for example, there's a garden suite out there that's more than 60 meters from the main dwelling, and they don't otherwise want to move it closer. Well, then they still have that garden suite opportunity. Okay, fine, you can keep it at that existing distance that's greater than 60 meters and continue on the garden suite route. If it becomes permanent, we want to see it clustered into that 60 meters. So that is the edge case I can give you. I think over time, you're absolutely right. We are going to see fewer and fewer garden suite applications.
Yeah, okay. So I appreciate that feedback. I mean, I understand that we have pre-existing. I mean, I well think that, I mean, grandfathering those the way they are today, that's fine. I think if we're wanting to move to this ARU, I think, and that seems like a better practice, why give the option, I guess, is for new ones. Leaving the ones that are and grandfathering those until they're come for renewal, most of those they're probably still 10 years away. They've just been renewed. I don't even know how many we actually have. I know we just approved one not too long ago, so that's got 10 years to go, right? That was just my comment. So I appreciate but I mean, that's the feedback. I would just take a look at it. Either way, I think it's a moot point. I mean, if that's where we're heading. The question I thought about is the special zone attached to the mill. That is I think it's a great idea. And I'm just wanting to confirm, if they were to want to do something in that zone, a site plan is required. Is that correct?
So I can answer that. It would depend specifically on what they would want to do. If they were building a new commercial building, for example, that would require site plan. If they wanted to have an expansion of a certain size, I believe the bylaw says it's an addition of 25% of the existing building, then they would be required to do a site plan. If they wanted to add a new parking area in excess of 5 parking spaces, they would be required to do a site plan in that case. Mm-hmm. At this time, I understand they're using it existing, so it wouldn't necessarily be a new development that would be required to go through the site plan process at this time.
I think it's a great idea. I think my only concern is that piece abuts to residential, and we've garnered a lot of feedback in the sense of these zoning changes and site plan changes, and whether it's a public meeting, whether it's not, who gets information, whatever the case may be. I would just not want to have negative impact to the mill, who are trying to do good stewardship of their business, and find out they come up against a serious concern from the residential aspect of Blythe because of that they weren't involved in the site plan or some other factor. I mean, I think it's a good thing that we're changing the zoning to, give them that special option. But I mean, I think making sure that the community is well-informed is going to vote not only well for them, but also North Huron as a whole, to ensure that we're also in mindful of the budding spaces and developments around. So if site plan, it's a dependent on whatever they're planning, then I think because site plan usually is a public meeting, usually it's through council, there's a lot of information that goes out. If it's just zoning changes, those always not necessarily get out to everybody. So I mean, I would be more apt to be concerned about that, but I think the way you're envisioning, or at least I'm hearing it, I don't think we're gonna run into that problem. And I think it is a great idea. I mean, they've done the work to buy that stuff and make sure that they have availability, and why wouldn't we want to change that zoning to ensure that they can do the things that they may want to do in the future?
And just to clarify, in terms of the process, if they were to do a zoning bylaw amendment, that would require a public notice to all adjacent landowners. The site plan control, council may recall about a month ago, I did bring a report and an updated bylaw that just spoke to provincial changes to the site plan process, in that the approvals in that case are now the decision of staff, so council will not be receiving any more site plans to council, but I will say staff will still be due diligent in reviewing site plans to ensure minimized impact. Things like site buffering, or if you have a commercial or industrial use that's adjacent to a residential use, you are required, for example, to have a fence or a planting strip, for example, just to ensure that there is appropriate buffering. So that would be something that we would consider through site plan, but just due to some of the changes in the province, it may not be as much of a public process as it was historically.
And just to follow up, so this is the official plan, and I apologize because I get sometimes we get them both commingled, and so this is not the zoning bylaw amendment either. So I mean, the uses are going to be buried in there about what is applicable to be able to be done on that property, and therefore that's going to be established in a public meeting, no different than tonight. So, people are going to have that opportunity to voice their concerns or issues about what potential risks or issues that may have as what's regards to that zoning.
Yeah. So immediately following the official plan review process, once that official plan amendment is deemed to be in full force and effect, we'll be coming back to council asking you to initiate the corresponding zoning bylaw update. So it will all move in tandem. It's nice and fresh in everybody's minds when they get that letter that says, okay, the zoning on your property is going to change exactly the same ways it changed in the official plan. Then residents say, oh, okay, we just did that. I'm going to go, double check things again. I've reviewed the mapping. Yep, looks like what I talked to them about at the open house. So we used to do it, the official plan review, and then usually it was a couple of years later, we did the zoning update. And it didn't work particularly efficiently, and so we've changed that process, and so the new session of council can expect that that'll be one of the first things we're coming to discuss with you.
Thank you. Go ahead, we're gonna start with Chris and then over to Anita.
Hey, thank you, Reeve, through you. That industrial parcel to the east of Blythe, did that landowner, is he happy with that designation? Because he is. Okay. Because I thought differently.
Anita?
Thank you, Reeve Bailey. I have two questions. By your proposed changes, you were talking about an addition of policy for lot creation for infrastructure, utilities, and agricultural designations. What do you mean with that? It's page 24 in your presentation.
Right. So an example of that might be like a utility building, for example, for, I'm just thinking of the top of my head, Union Gas or something like that. They would have special permissions to create a lot in agricultural area for that infrastructure use, provided they, would be in accordance with the other policies in the plan. But that's just to provide specific circumstances for those infrastructure and utility uses.
And does it also cover the windmills then or not, or is that
No,
not really a utility?
no, it would not
Okay.
consider.
All right, my other question is, ARUs in urban settings, or those, do they have to be standalone buildings, like tiny houses, or can they be an addition to an existing property?
Yeah.
And it's probably all in the special guide that was, that you're referring to, but we had an application for a sort of a garden suite at a rental house, and the neighbors didn't agree with that. So within this policy, they wouldn't necessarily be going to council again for
No public process.
no public process in that anymore.
This is all guided by the More Homes, More Choices Act from the provincial level, and the additional residential unit policy is actually one that cannot be appealed. It has to come into force and effect as per the provincial direction. So the goal is to allow people to intensify their properties, and again, they have to fit within what the zoning bylaw says. So there'll still be setback requirements, and still be lot coverage requirements. There can still be a parking requirement for that new unit, but it would all be permitted as of right, provided you meet those parameters. No notification to the neighbors, no public meeting required.
That's quite a change then,
Risky.
yeah. Even if you don't notify your neighbors, so all of a sudden there can be a building up in your neighbor's yard. Yeah.
I can say it's been occurring in the town of Goderich. The detached units have been happening there for probably about 4 years now. And there's a number that have been set up within the town, and it's really not been an issue, is my understanding from speaking to members of their staff.
Kevin?
Thank you, through you, Reed. Just as a follow-up to Councillor Palmer's question on the southeast corner of Blythe, the industrial property that's there. That parcel has been historically agriculture. There's never been an industrial building on it or use on it, and it does adjacent residential areas. I'm just curious as why it's designated industrial when it's pretty much landlocked. None of those streets that are on here actually go to it. So it's always been agricultural property. Is there a difference, once it's industrial land, can they farm on it? Can they, or is it like, is there a different tax base, or how? I'm not sure why, or what, historically that would be industrial. It's never been industrial. Why, how would that get that designation, and why wouldn't we change it to residential now when we're trying to expand our residential in Blythe?
I think as we talked about at the outset of this policy, or the process, you know, it's important to maintain a balance. Hannah, you could correct me if I'm wrong, maybe we could pull up the presentation, but is the existing Hubbard's rutabaga facility designated industrial?
Yes,
It is.
just to the north of it.
So if I had to hazard a guess, it would be that because the property to the north was the industrial, that likely this was designated industrial to allow for the expansion of that agricultural processing establishment, should it have been required. What council will note along the east side of the Hubbard's processing is there's that white strip. That is a municipal road allowance. It's not built,
Yeah, it's not built, yeah.
but that is the access to these lands, should they be developed for an industrial purpose. Fully appreciate the question, though. The abutting lands are designated residential, and what we know, right, is that there has to be some level of separation distances between residential, sensitive uses, and industrial establishments. It is quite possible that this property won't develop for a true industrial use in terms of, you know, some type of factory, but it might develop eventually for a more lighter industrial use, something that wouldn't be incompatible with residential. And so I think it's important, we want to maintain employment areas in our different settlement areas. This is the only section of Blythe that's currently designated for industrial development.
But it's part of the farm land.
Yes, currently it's farmed, and it can continue to be farmed.
Okay, you know, it's always been part of the farm, the adjacent farm, and I just don't know why that hunk would have been industrial when it's historically been farmed since forever. And it was sold in with the farm just recently, and why that would still be industrial. Huh?
So it's been industrial all these years, and we're not proposing to de-designate it at this time. It's certainly something we can reevaluate in another 5 years' time at the next 5-year review and have additional discussions with that landowner. Again, our discussions were that they were satisfied with the designation as it was, and so that contributed to our decision just to leave things lie.
Trevor?
Maybe like one of the conversations that I look at is not necessarily the zoning per se, but the uses. So regardless of whether it's zoned industrial or whatever, they can, if it's a proposed use that they can farm it, then so be it. I mean, at the end of the day, the official plan then just leads into the zoning bylaw, which only allows them to do what they can do on their specific property based on the zoning. So, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't take a lot of stock in the sense of whether it's industrial or agriculture, other than if it's residential versus industrial, because you obviously can't build a house in an industrial section. So, I think these are great questions, but ultimately, I also look at it as, I don't think the planning department is going to put a zone on it that hasn't been discussed with a landowner. Like, you would never change the zone from agriculture to industrial without having a conversation with the landowner. So, if council, county staff have had a conversation and they believe they're okay with it, I think we should acknowledge that we should be okay with it. I completely agree your questions about what the uses have been, but ultimately, I think if they're happy with the use that they're doing now, I don't think anything's gonna change.
Thank you very kindly. Go ahead, Kevin.
Just as a follow-up, yeah, my question was just as, this is the process of changing designations, and this is the time that you do change designations. We're waiting another 5 year. My questions only came with that, because of that piece of property, that farmland that is adjacent to this, that is on this property. That farmland has residential designation, it has industrial resignation, and Ag 1 resignation, all on the same piece of property that's being plowed. I can't grow a crop on my residential property. I'm just curious, it's got 3 designations, that's all I'm just trying to figure out, why is it industrial, why is this farm, and why is this residential? That wedge piece also belongs to that farm.
So we're just aligning it so that it would all line up,
Yeah.
you're right.
Yeah, so that farm has residential on one corner, one piece of the back, industrial, and farm, all on one piece of property. And that's all we're in the process of changing things. I was just curious as to why a farm would have 3 designations.
So, what we're doing here is we're trying to indicate what the future land uses will be in different areas of the village. And so this outlines, you're right, this outlines that, the bulk of that property is, there's a portion of it that's in Morris Turnberry, it's all designated for agriculture. The area along 25, the brown is highway commercial, the lands into the rear would be residential, and then again, the area in blue would be industrial. If over time, right, the development of the community is such that that's no longer appropriate, then we would step back and say, okay, where might be another area to do an expansion of the employment areas for the Blythe settlement area. The tricky part with Blythe, particularly in this corner, is that you're immediately surrounded by another municipality, which means if we were to expand, we could expand the Blythe settlement area into Morris Turnberry and designate those lands industrial, further along County Road 25, if that perhaps made more logical sense. But in terms of the lands within North Huron, we're at our end here. And so then we're looking, if we were to go to the northwest corner, well, there's residential properties there as well. So introducing an industrial designation is not necessarily straightforward. So I appreciate the question, and it was something that we wrestled with a little bit was, what do we do as we're trying to make sure that, yes, we need more housing, but we also want to make sure there's sufficient opportunities for local investment in economic development. And right now in Blythe, there isn't a lot of land designated for this. So our feeling was that at this time, let's leave things as they are. Let's see what happens in the next 5 years of Blythe's development, and then we'll reassess.
Okay. I think we've give this a good go-around, unless there's someone else has another question. I think we've throttled her pretty good tonight. Ladies, I want to thank you very much for coming out, so we're now going to go to 2022-26, the North Huron Official Plan 5-Year Review Update on Process. You did that right.
I'll move the recommended motion.
Trevor moves, seconder please. Chris Palmer seconds. All in favor? Carries, thank you. Thank you, ladies. We have no closed session tonight. Confirmatory, bylaw number 81-2022, confinementary bylaw. Do I have a mover? I have Anita moving, have Paul seconding. All in favor? Carries. Adjournment, that the Council of Township of North Huron hereby agrees there being no further business in council. The meeting hereby adjourns at 7:57 PM. Do I have a mover? I have Rick moving. I please have a seconder. Trevor seconds. All in favor? Carries. Stay safe, everyone.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that was great to sit through, actually.